The millionaire's daughter wasn't blind until the maid uncovered the truth. On the cliffs of Cornwall, the Whitmore estate rose with solemn grace against the morning mist. Inside the vast drawing room, little Anna sat quietly on the long velvet seat, clutching a worn-out teddy bear as if it were her entire world. Since the day she was born, everyone had accepted that Anna was blind. Her wide but vacant eyes seemed like undeniable proof. Through the pale light filtering across the tall windows, her father, Edward Whitmore, stood silently by the fireplace. Once a celebrated novelist, his pen had grown silent after the death of his wife, leaving the house as hushed as his heart. Watching his daughter, Edward's chest tightened between two extremes, the fear that reality would always be merciless, and the fragile hope that perhaps there was something more. The life of Edward had long fallen into a monotonous cycle, heavier than the relentless sea winds battering the cliffs outside. Each morning he prepared a simple breakfast, a slice of bread, a bit of jam, and a cup of black tea. At the long oak table, only 2 chairs were ever used, one for him, one for Anna. Silence ruled so completely that even the sound of a knife cutting bread echoed like a bell through the dining room. After breakfast, Edward helped Anna dress. His hands, once adept at striking the keys of a typewriter, now clumsily fastened tiny buttons one by one. He brushed her golden hair gently, as if a stronger stroke might cause her to shatter. Most of the time, the girl sat motionless, her vacant gaze fixed on nothing, clutching her threadbare teddy bear. The seaside estate had been designed to welcome light in abundance, but since the death of his wife, that very light only deepened the chill within its walls. The towering windows that looked out onto the vast ocean had become mirrors of solitude. Edward often led Anna to the grand drawing room, where he read her children's books. His voice was steady, sometimes faltering, and almost never met with response. Yet even the slightest furrow of her brow or an accidental blink was enough for him to cling to as a fragile spark of hope. The death of his wife, Margaret, left a wound that never closed. She had perished in a train accident just days after Anna's birth. That loss locked Edward inside the house, cutting ties with friends, declining gatherings and celebrations. Once a man of light and literature, he had become a shadow, retreating from the world. In his heart, he believed he had failed to protect his wife, failed to give his daughter a normal life. At night, when Anna slept, Edward often sat in his study before a rusting typewriter. He would type a few lines, then stop, as if each word was a blade pressing into his grief for Margaret. Outside, the crash of waves mingled with the howl of sea winds, composing a mournful symphony without end. He still had wealth, a name, prestige, but all felt meaningless. The only promise he clung to was a silent one, to protect Anna at all costs, even if he did not know how to give her a full life. On certain afternoons, Edward led Anna onto the grassy bluff facing the sea. He placed her small hand upon wild purple blossoms, describing their color and shape. "This is purple, like the sky just before sunset," he whispered. Anna rarely replied, yet the faint curve of a smile upon her lips was enough to tighten his chest with emotion. The staff in the house remained quiet, respectful, and accustomed to this strange rhythm of life. They rarely conversed and never asked questions, only occasionally whispering among themselves about the gloomy atmosphere inside the mansion. One long-serving servant claimed to have heard Anna humming at night, while another swore they had seen the little girl lift her head when the church bells rang. Edward never wanted to hear such rumors. He dismissed them as illusions, incapable of changing reality. Every evening, after a silent meal with his daughter, he would retreat to his study. From time to time, Edward returned to the room his late wife had prepared before she passed away. The room was painted in soft colors, with animals drawn on the walls and a rocking chair beside the cradle. He had never changed anything, as if it were a sanctuary frozen in time. There, he quietly wondered whether his wife would have done better. whether Anna might have had a different life if her mother were still alive. One misty morning, as waves crashed violently against the cliffs, a knock echoed through the Whitmore estate. Edward opened the door to find a young woman standing on the porch. Her brown hair was tied neatly back, her deep eyes carrying both weariness and quiet strength. She introduced herself in a calm, steady voice. "I'm Sophie Bennett. I've come to apply for the position as housekeeper and child caretaker." Edward studied her for a long moment. He had met many candidates before, some too boastful, others far too curious. But Sophie was different. She did not try to prove anything. She simply stood there with a quiet presence that unsettled him in a strange, unexpected way. During their brief conversation, Sophie shared that she had once worked as a pediatric nurse in a small hospital. She was used to caring for children, handling their endless crying, their little scrapes, their invisible fears. But after a tragic turn, she had left her profession. Her voice trembled slightly as she confessed, "I lost my newborn daughter not long ago." The room fell into silence. Edward met her gaze and saw in her eyes a familiar grief, the same shadow he carried within himself. He did not press her with questions. He simply nodded. He knew what it meant to lose someone, and perhaps that was why he allowed Sophie into the house. On her first day, Sophie began cleaning the long, unused rooms. Her steps were gentle, almost hesitant, as though she feared disturbing the memories that slept within the old stone walls. Every hallway, every fading portrait, whispered of a home that carried too many untold stories. In the kitchen, Sophie unexpectedly saw Anna sitting by the window, clutching her teddy bear. The morning light fell softly across the child's pale face. Her eyes were vacant, yet strangely fragile, stirring something deep within Sophie. She froze for a few seconds, then quietly took a seat across from the girl, saying nothing. In that moment, between two strangers, an invisible string began to tremble. In the days that followed, Sophie worked in quiet rhythm, as though blending with the endless crash of waves outside. Yet while she dusted and swept, she could not help but notice Anna. There was something about the girl that unsettled her deeply. One morning, Sophie entered the drawing room to find Anna sitting on the carpet, clutching her teddy bear. As Sophie dragged a wooden chair aside, the floor groaned under its weight. At that sound, Anna tilted her head ever so slightly toward it. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She forced herself to continue her task calmly, as though nothing had happened. A few days later, Sophie drew the curtains open to let in the morning light. At that instant, Anna turned her face toward the window, her vacant eyes seeming to search for something unseen. Sophie held her breath. Could it be that the child was not entirely lost in darkness? Sophie began to test small experiments. She let a cloth drop softly to the floor. Anna startled. She walked past, casting her shadow across the girl. Anna seemed to frown. None of these were obvious reactions, but together they whispered of a hidden truth. One afternoon, while folding linen in the hallway, Sophie heard a faint melody. She froze. It was a soft humming, fragile as a whisper. She crept closer and found Anna sitting on the floor, lips moving to an unformed tune. Sophie did not interrupt. Instead, she sat a few feet away, continuing her folding, allowing the silence to cradle the sound. Then Anna unexpectedly crawled toward the wall, her small hands reaching out to feel her way forward. Sophie's chest tightened. She wanted to rush in, but instead she extended her own hand gently, placing it where the child might reach. When those tiny fingers brushed her skin, Sophie felt as though a quiet current surged through her. The touch lasted only a second, yet it dissolved the distance between their souls. From that moment on, Sophie no longer saw Anna as a helpless child. The girl was trying to speak, only no one had listened. And Sophie realized in some unspoken way she had been chosen to hear the whisper. One evening, when he encountered Sophie in the hallway, he asked in a stern voice, "What do you think of the girl?" Sophie hesitated, then replied frankly, "I don't see anything broken in her, sir. I only see that she is very lonely." Edward did not respond, but those words followed him back to his room, echoing in his mind more strongly than any medical report ever had. One afternoon, when the house was steeped in silence, Sophie sat across from Anna, holding a flashlight. She whispered, "I'm going to turn on a little light. If you feel anything, let me know, okay?" Anna remained silent. Sophie turned on the light, moving it from left to right. At first, nothing happened. Then suddenly, Anna blinked. Her lips trembled, and she whispered, her voice hoarse and fragile, I think I see something." Sophie's heart tightened. Tears welled in her eyes. A small phrase, but a miracle. She took Anna's hand, her voice shaking. "I'm here with you, Anna." The girl squeezed her fingers, for the first time seeking comfort from someone other than her father. Sophie understood she was on the right path. That night, Edward noticed his daughter calmer than usual. He met Sophie in the hallway and asked with suspicion, "I see she's different. What did you do?" Sophie hesitated, then half-truthfully replied, "I only spent time with her. I think the only thing she needs is someone by her side." Edward said nothing, but even he could clearly feel the atmosphere in the mansion had shifted since Sophie's arrival. The cold walls no longer felt so suffocating. Still, Sophie knew what she had discovered was too great to keep hidden forever. That night, in her small room, she could not stop thinking about Anna blinking and whispering that she had seen light. The girl was not completely blind. There was a secret in those eyes, and Sophie was determined to uncover it, no matter the cost. One rainy afternoon, Sophie sat once more before Anna, this time with greater resolve. "I'll turn on the light again. If you feel anything, tell me, all right?" The beam flashed. Anna blinked twice, wincing as if dazzled. Then, trembling, she exclaimed, I see light." "Mother?" Sophie froze. Anna had never called anyone mother. Tears filled Sophie's eyes, as if her own lost daughter were speaking through this child. She hugged Anna tightly, whispering through sobs, "I'm here, my love. Don't be afraid." At that moment, a furious shout came from the hallway. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Edward stormed in, his face flushed with anger. He glared at the flashlight in Sophie's hand and ripped it away. "You dare experiment on my daughter? Who do you think you are?" Sophie stammered, not yet able to explain, when something astonishing happened. Anna suddenly stood up, rushed forward, and clung tightly to Sophie. Edward froze. Never before had he seen his daughter act with such determination. Shaking but with a clear voice, Anna said, "Father, I see light." Edward's heart clenched. He nearly collapsed. For years he had believed his daughter blind, every doctor confirming it. But now, before his eyes, Anna was saying the impossible. What did you just say?" he whispered. "I see light," Anna repeated, pressing herself against Sophie. Edward sank into a chair, covering his face. His long-held certainty was crumbling. He looked at Sophie with eyes filled with both suspicion and hope. "How long have you known about this?" "For only a few days," Sophie admitted, her voice trembling. "I didn't want to raise false hopes for you or for her." Silence enveloped the room. Only the sound of rain fell against the window. At last, Edward drew a deep breath. "Stop giving her the eye drops, starting tomorrow." Sophie nodded. In the days that followed, Anna no longer used the medication. She began reacting more and more to natural light. In the mornings, when Sophie opened the curtains, Anna turned her head toward the window, sitting quietly for minutes as if savoring the glow. In the afternoons, she noticed shadows, tracking moving objects. Edward watched silently, his face filled with astonishment mixed with doubt. He was forced to believe what he saw. His daughter was not living in total darkness. One afternoon, as Anna played with the black and white cards Sophie had prepared, Edward entered. He saw his daughter hesitate slightly before pointing to the card with a circle. Sophie gasped. "She can see it?" Edward said nothing, but tears glistened in his eyes. At the same time, a troubling thought stirred within him. If Anna truly could see, even just a little, then who had decided to keep her in darkness for so long? In the days that followed, within the seaside estate, something miraculous began to unfold. With the eye drops discontinued, Anna started to change. Each morning, Sophie drew the heavy curtains wide to let the sunlight pour in. For the first time in years, Edward saw his daughter turn her face toward the window, her vacant eyes trembling as if startled by the rays. She stood motionless for several minutes, as though tasting a world entirely new. In the afternoons, Sophie introduced simple flashcards, circles, squares, black lines on white backgrounds. At first, Anna hesitated, her small fingers trembling as they touched each card. Then suddenly, she pointed straight to the circle. Sophie held her breath, while Edward, standing behind, felt his eyes brim with tears. He whispered to himself, almost in disbelief, She really sees." From that moment, hope surged within him, but alongside it, a dark question grew. If Anna could truly perceive light, why had he been forced to believe for years that she was blind beyond hope? One morning, while tidying the bathroom, Sophie discovered an old wooden box hidden behind stacks of towels. Inside were several small bottles of eye drops, some half empty. The labels were faded, peeling in places, but one name remained clear: Dr. Malcolm Graves. A chill ran down Sophie's spine. She knew that was the doctor who had first declared Anna beyond saving. She carried the box downstairs and placed it before Edward on the kitchen table. "I found this," she said quietly. Edward lifted the lid and stared at the bottles. His face darkened. Picking one up, he read the name aloud. "Graves," he muttered. "He was the first to tell me Anna would never see, and I believed him." Sophie clenched her hands. Maybe. She was never completely blind. Maybe these drops suppressed the little light she had. Edward's jaw tightened, his fist trembling. He remembered Graves' confident tone, the certainty of his verdict, and himself too broken by Margaret's death to question it. "I need the truth," Edward said, his voice hoarse yet firm. Sophie nodded. She decided to contact an old friend, now an ophthalmologist at the local hospital. The days of waiting felt endless. During that time, Edward and Sophie continued encouraging Anna to play with light and colors. The little girl gradually began to smile more, something unseen for many years. Finally, Annie called Sophie. "You must come immediately." In the hospital cafe, Annie handed her a report. "This isn't ordinary eye drops. It contains extremely high doses of cyclopentolate. With long-term use, the pupils become nearly unresponsive, creating a condition that mimics blindness." Sophie was stunned. "You mean someone did this intentionally?" "Exactly. This isn't a mistake. This is a formula deliberately designed." Shoo, when Edward read the report that evening, his face twisted with fury. He slammed the table. "We lost all those years because of someone who thought he had the right to play God." Sophie laid her hand over his, calming him. "What matters now is Anna. She needs you to stay steady." But Edward could hardly contain the storm inside him. The name of that doctor, Dr. Malcolm Graves, echoed like an unhealed wound. He blamed himself for trusting blindly, for failing to protect his daughter. He swore he would find Graves, confront him, and demand back the years that had been stolen. Since stopping the medication, Anna changed day by day. She recognized light, distinguished colors, and even asked the names of objects. One morning, as she stood by the window, she whispered, "Yellow, like my dress." Edward broke down in tears. He understood then that his daughter had not lived in darkness because of fate, but because of deception and betrayal. Her smile was now more precious than all his fortune. At night, the mansion's kitchen echoed with voices, laughter, and the scent of chamomile tea. Edward, once cold and distant, now sat with them, sharing everyday stories. The mansion was no longer a tomb, but a home. One day, Anna drew 3 figures holding hands. "This is us." Edward and Sophie exchanged a glance, needing no words. The lawsuit against Dr. Malcolm Graves was still ongoing, but it was no longer the core of their lives. What truly mattered was that Anna laughed, that she gazed curiously at the world with her shining eyes. Before bedtime, the little girl whispered, "I see the light, Mama." Sophie held her tightly, while Edward stood at the door, his eyes brimming with tears. He understood that those words were the beginning of a new life. The Whitmore mansion, once as cold as a museum, now overflowed with laughter, light, and love. Every morning, Sophie pulled the curtains wide to let sunlight flood in. Anna sat by the window, her face bathed in pale light. She blinked rapidly, then whispered softly, "This light, it feels warm." Hearing this, Edward's heart nearly broke open. For years he had read books aloud to his daughter in silence. Now a single simple sentence was more precious than every work he had ever written. At noon, Sophie placed before Anna brightly colored objects: a red ball, a blue handkerchief, yellow flowers from the garden. At first, Anna only stared, but gradually she reached toward the color Sophie named. "This one is yellow, like the sun," Anna said, and Edward burst into tears. In the afternoons, the 3 of them walked together across the grassy bluff by the sea. The wind carried salt and wildflower scents. Edward placed Anna's hand upon a blossom, while Sophie stood beside them, describing its color and shape. Sometimes Anna giggled, her clear laughter echoing through a house that for so long had known only silence. The atmosphere within the Whitmore estate shifted day by day. The mansion, once a fortress of cold, now brimmed with voices and laughter. At dinner, the clink of utensils was no longer the only sound. There were fragments of conversation. Anna describing a cloud shaped like a ship, Sophie recalling her days as a nurse, Edward, at last, sharing stories of his years traveling as a writer. One evening, Sophie was tidying when she heard a knock at the study door. Edward stepped out, holding a sheet of paper. His voice trembled. "Today I wrote 3 pages. After all these years, the words finally came." Sophie smiled. "That's thanks to Anna." Edward looked at her for a long moment. "Not just Anna. Thanks to you." In that instant, both fell silent. They knew that within this house once drowned in darkness, something new was forming. Not only Anna's awakening, but their own rebirth as well. Anna sensed it more than anyone. One afternoon, she sat scribbling with the crayons Sophie had bought her. When she finished, she rushed to Edward and Sophie, holding up her drawing. It was simple: 3 figures holding hands, with the sea behind them and a large sun above. Anna looked up, smiling. "This is our family." Edward and Sophie stood still, speechless. No further words were needed. That single sentence was enough to mend wounds they had once thought beyond healing. On summer evenings, as the sun slowly dipped into the Sea of Cornwall, Edward often walked with Anna along the wet sand. Sophie came too, her steps light, keeping pace with father and daughter. Waves lapped gently, leaving silver trails behind, while the sky burned with hues of orange and gold. One evening, as Anna scampered ahead, Sophie and Edward walked side by side. The sea breeze swept through Sophie's hair, revealing a face weary yet tender. Edward glanced at her for a long moment before speaking quietly. "Did you ever have dreams for your daughter?" Sophie paused, her voice dropping. "Yes, I dreamed of her growing up, running, learning, making friends. But the accident stole it all. I left the hospital because I couldn't bear walking into children's wards and not seeing my own child. Edward fell silent, his hands tightening. After a moment he said, voice strained with grief, "I lost everything too. Margaret, she was the light of my life. When she died, I made myself a prisoner inside this house. I let Anna grow up surrounded by shadows." Sophie turned to him. In the glow of the sunset, their eyes met, and both realized the same truth. Their sorrows were not separate, but parallel, like two rivers finally meeting at the sea. The next day, in the drawing room, Anna sat coloring with her crayons. Sophie knelt beside her, gently stroking the girl's hair. Suddenly Anna looked up, her lips shaping a single word, small, fragile, yet powerful enough to still Sophie's heart. "Mommy." The room fell silent. Tears welled in Sophie's eyes as she pulled Anna into her arms. "I'm here, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice trembling. Edward stood in the doorway, watching. His chest ached, filled with both pain and warmth. He understood that Anna had found in Sophie something he could never give alone. A mother? That night, Edward sat alone by the window, staring into the vast black sea. In his heart, an undeniable truth took root. Sophie had not only saved Anna, she had saved him as well. Time passed, and the heavy days of the Whitmore estate slowly faded into memory. Anna changed with each sunrise. She began to recognize the blue of the sea, the gold of sunlight, and sometimes squealed with joy when she identified the vivid red of a flower. Her laughter had become the familiar music of a house once cold and silent. One afternoon, Edward brought Sophie and Anna down to the beach. The waves lapped gently at the shore, the wind carrying the taste of salt. Anna dashed about, gathering tiny seashells, sometimes turning back to call out, "Daddy, Mommy, look!" The words pierced Edward's heart with trembling warmth. He glanced at Sophie and found her tender gaze resting on their daughter. In that moment, he knew he was no longer alone. They sat together on the sand, watching the blazing sun sink into the sea. Edward was silent for a long while, his hands clenched tight. At last, he turned to Sophie, his eyes steady, though his voice trembled. "Sophie, all my life I've written stories for others. But for the first time, I want to write a story for myself, and I want you to be its leading character." Sophie's eyes widened, tears welling up. Edward sank to one knee on the sand, pulling a small ring from his pocket. "You brought the light back to Anna. You brought it back to me as well. Sophie Bennett, will you marry me?" Sophie raised a hand to her lips, overcome. The sunset bathed her face, turning her tears into shining stars. She nodded, unable to speak. Anna rushed into their arms, hugging them both tightly, her joyful voice carrying over the waves. "Our family." The wedding took place on a gentle autumn morning. Along the Cornwall shore, simple wooden chairs were neatly arranged, draped in white cloth that fluttered in the breeze. Before them stretched the deep blue sea, waves crashing softly like the music of the ceremony itself. Anna wore a little white dress, a crown of wildflowers resting on her hair. She scattered petals along the aisle, her bright laughter rising with the waves. Guests chuckled warmly, and Edward watched his daughter with pride, his heart overflowing with a joy he had never known. Sophie appeared in a modest, flowing wedding gown. Her brown hair fell loosely, her eyes glistening in the soft morning light. Edward stood waiting at the end of the aisle, his hands trembling but his gaze steady, radiant. As Sophie reached him, Anna clasped her hand and placed it into Edward's. The ceremony was simple, witnessed only by those dearest to them. The priest spoke blessings, his voice carried by the sea breeze like whispers of nature itself. Edward turned to Sophie, his voice breaking. You are the light returned to my life. I vow to love you, to protect you, and to raise Anna by your side with all my heart." Tears filled Sophie's eyes as she answered, "You and Anna gave me a family when I thought I had lost everything. I promise to be the flame that keeps us warm, today and always." Applause rose as Edward slipped the ring onto Sophie's finger. They kissed beneath the open sky, and Anna ran forward, hugging them both tightly, shouting with glee, "We are a family." From afar, the sunlight shimmered across the sea, brilliant as a witness to their new beginning. The Whitmore estate, once shrouded in silence, had become a true home, filled with laughter, with love, and with light. That winter, the London courthouse was packed as the trial of Dr. Malcolm Graves unfolded. The bottles of eye drops were presented as evidence. Experts confirmed that the formula contained compounds capable of prolonging pupil dilation and concealing partial sight. Graves's defenses crumbled beneath the weight of undeniable truth. Edward sat silently in the courtroom, his hand tightly clasping Sophie's. Beside them, Anna gazed toward the sunlight streaming through the tall windows. When the judge pronounced the sentence, permanent revocation of his medical license and imprisonment for intentional harm, the chamber buzzed with murmurs. Edward did not feel triumph. Instead, a quiet sorrow settled in his heart. His daughter had lost precious years to greed and cruelty. But justice at last had spoken. Outside the courthouse, Sophie squeezed Edward's hand and whispered, "What matters is that Anna found the light again. We don't have to look back anymore." Edward nodded, relief glimmering in his eyes like the first breath of spring. In the months that followed, joy filled the Whitmore estate. Anna now attended school, returning each day with stories of colors, letters, and new friends. Her laughter became the music that chased away every lingering shadow. One afternoon, as Anna scribbled letters at the table, Sophie rested a hand over her stomach, her eyes radiant. She whispered to Edward, "Love, we're having a baby." Edward froze, then pulled her into his arms. Tears spilled, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming joy. Anna looked up, her eyes sparkling. "I'm going to have a brother or sister? I'll be the big sister?" Sophie smiled and nodded. Anna wrapped her arms around her mother, her laughter ringing like bells. In the months that followed, the family prepared for the new arrival. Anna added to the drawing pinned in the sitting room. Now 4 figures stood hand in hand, beneath an even brighter sun. One spring morning, Edward stepped onto the balcony. The sea breeze carried the scent of blooming wildflowers. Behind him, Sophie sat reading, her hand gently caressing her round belly. Anna skipped across the room, singing softly to herself. Edward smiled. For the first time in years, life felt whole. He whispered, as though speaking to the wind, "Margaret, do you see? Our family has found the light again." And as the waves kissed the shore, he knew the past had finally been laid to rest. Before them stretched only a radiant path of love, of family, and of a brand new beginning.